Welcome back to our women leadership sessions this afternoon. These are working mothers keeping our dreams alive. I'm Susan Englert and excited to be back this year to moderate. At this time, I'd like to take a moment to honor the contributions and accomplishments of influential women in our careers with the next two speakers. We will save your questions for a panel session following Tammy's presentation this afternoon. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. She is a retired international wide-body pilot for United Airlines. She began her journey in 1982, taking flying lessons in secret as a teenager at a time when it is not acceptable for girls to challenge traditional male roles. In her book, Jet Boss, a female pilot taking risks and fly high, she brings you directly inside the cockpit and lays a blueprint on how to defy expectations and do things never thought possible. Please join with me in welcoming Captain Lauren Savino.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I think I can handle this crowd here. So I'm Captain Laura Savino, and they invited me here. Thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction. I was thinking about what am I going to talk about? Well, I think I'm going to talk about, they suggested, the journey. How did I become an international wide-body pilot at a time where when I was born and when I was raised, it wasn't even legal yet for women to fly commercially. All right, so I have to start off. So I've watched lots of presentations where pilots have come in and they've talked about their careers and all of that. And 95% of pilots are male, statistically. And so virtually every one of those presentations is a guy who's giving his speech. Most of them come out of the military. And it seems like every single presentation starts with the exact same thing. A picture of them at about 5 years old holding an airplane saying, I've known since I was this big, I was going to be a pilot. Well, I'd just like to show you how I started off here. So now this is me when I was 5 years old. And when I was a little girl, I got one present, the same one over and over again. I got dolls. And when my parents didn't give me a doll, my grandma would give me a doll. And 9 out of 10 times, that doll was a bride. My end-all, be-all goal as a child of the 60s was to grow up to be a bride. So back then, now some of you may be old enough to remember the times in the 60s and the 70s before the internet was invented. And back then, you only knew what you were directly exposed to, what your dad did, maybe what your mom did, maybe something a teacher told you. You lived in a very small bubble. You were completely oblivious to anything in the world other than what you actually personally saw and experienced yourself. So there wasn't a whole lot. When I was a kid, my mom wasn't legally allowed to have a credit card. She couldn't own property. Everything had to be in my father's name. She would sign her name, Mrs. Joseph Savino. She didn't even have a name. So that's the way that I grew up. And I remember the astronaut program, the space program. Who could tell me when do we first send a man into space? This is a gee whiz quiz. Can anyone tell me that? 1961. We had our space program, our first man in space. And who was the first astronaut to go up into space? Al Shepard was the first one to go in space. And do you realize that we had Al Shepard up in space 12 years before we had our first female commercial pilot in the United States. 12 years before a woman could legally fly an airplane, and that with passengers. And that woman was Emily Warner, who I flew with, which just shows you how old I am, or how young it is that women have been in aviation. All right, so what happened? How did I end up becoming a airline pilot? Well, a funny thing happens when you're a kid. You become a teenager, right? And what happens with teenagers? They get just a little bit rebellious. So I hit my teen years. I got my driver's license. Well, the great thing about living in the Stone Ages was that we also had a lot of freedom. Basically, our parents couldn't care less where we were, out of sight, out of mind. We could just disappear all day. And as long as you were back before the, street lights came on, nobody cared. So I got my driver's license and I started exploring. And guess what I found? Did not know existed. I found a general aviation airport, a small airport. I did not know that there were small airplanes. I knew that the military flew airplanes. I knew that the airliners flew airplanes, had never seen one, did not know there was such a thing as small airplanes. So I'm walking around this airport and I stumbled into a flight school. Now, did you know that you can take flying lessons? I had no clue, none, zero. I'm like, what? No, get out of here. I just thought, and this is pretty much true, that the only way you can learn how to fly is if you are a white male in the military, and that was it. And that pretty much was true. But as it turns out, for $20, you go up for a first flying lesson, and I did have $20. So I went up, I was hooked, mesmerized. I'd never seen, no internet, never seen the ground from the sky, never saw any of that before. So I had to do it again. There was a problem though. I didn't have the money to take flying lessons, and my parents most certainly would not allow me to do that. And as a cheerleader, I had a reputation to uphold. I could not let anybody know that I liked math or science or anything like that. That would just be, that would be the death knell to, any sort of social popularity. So I started hanging around the airport. I made good friends with the owner of the flight school, this old guy named Fred, and I came up with an idea. How about if I work at the flight school for free in exchange for flying lessons? And surprisingly, he quite liked that idea. In hindsight, I think there might have been some tax evasion going on here. But I started working for him, got my flying lessons in, and then I just kept the entire thing a secret so nobody knew I was doing it. And all I wanted was to, there were very few pictures back then, excuse the blur. All I wanted, my end-all be-all goal, and I never really thought I'd ever achieve this, would be to fly solo, to actually go up in an airplane completely alone, kick the instructor out, and fly around the pattern by myself. Really never thought anything like that would happen. Well, here I am. This is my first solo as a teenager, and you know how it is when you kind of just start doing something, and then all of a sudden you're like, here you are? I was like, whoa, I did that. I couldn't believe I got that far. And then I just kept going. I never had any long-term goal on the horizon. I'm going to be an airline pilot someday, because for one thing, that would have been totally overwhelming. It would have been so unrealistic. But I just kept doing one foot in front of the other, one step, one thing leads to the next. And before you know it, over and over again, you achieve something that you just didn't even picture a year earlier, you ever getting that far. So the flying was one thing. That's obviously kept me coming back. But you know what really, truly kept me coming back to that airport every single day? It was the community. The people there all loved airplanes like me, and they were really nice to me. So now one of our flight instructors, who was a Vietnam vet, was a Boy Scout leader. Now I was a Girl Scout. Do you know what we did in Girl Scouts? We made potholders. So he ran a Boy Scout troop, and they did all these super cool aviation adventures. So he let me join his Boy Scout troop. I am officially, technically, the very first female Boy Scout in America. But we had to hide that I was a girl. But in any case, I got to do all the boy activities. So from there, I was ready to go off to college, and I couldn't ask my parents or my guidance counselor or anybody at school, because nobody knew I was flying, and nobody knew anything about aviation anyways. So the only people I could get advice from were the people from the airport, the other pilots. And they told me there's one place you have to go. Okay, all right, who can tell me who this is a picture of? Amelia Earhart. She is flying a Lockheed Electra, and this is the aircraft that she actually went missing in. This is Purdue University. So Amelia Earhart was actually on staff at Purdue. She was a counselor for girls, and Purdue was the very first university in the United States to open up engineering and STEM and math careers, majors to women. And they recruited Amelia Earhart, and she actually was a big part of that program, trying to get girls for the first time into math and science fields. And that aircraft, that Lockheed Electra, actually was owned by Purdue University. It was purchased by the Purdue Research Foundation, Scientific Research Foundation, and donated to her for her last fateful trip. They didn't get the airplane back. So I went to Purdue. Now, who can guess? Okay, everybody, I need some participation here. Who can guess what my major was when I went my freshman year when I went to Purdue? It was mother approved. That's actually really good. My mom was a teacher, very good, gold star, but that's not the right answer, but that's a good guess. No, I was an art major because my mom wanted me to be an artist, and I was pretty good in art. and it would get me in the door. So I'm like, yeah, Mom, I'm going to go to Purdue. I'm going to be an art major. Any case, so I went off to Purdue, and then I went searching until I found this. I just walked around and walked around. Purdue has an airport until I found Hangar 6, which is where all the flight students went. This is actually a recent picture of me because my son is a student at Purdue. So I went searching until I found the flight department. And once I got there, I found out that there were about 30 people in the entire major. And this is a school that has 33,000 students because each student has to have their own airplane. It's a very small program. And the only way to get in was you had to have your pilot's license to start with, and somebody would have to drop out or fail out first semester freshman year. So I was determined somebody would, drop out because they wanted to do something else, and I would get that slot. Then I came to find out that there were 300 students waiting for that one and only slot if it ever opened. So I decided there was only one thing I could do: figure out who it was that makes the decision and then stalk them. So that's exactly what I did. I stalked Professor Larry Gross, great guy. I'm still friends with him to this day, which makes me think he must have been a lot younger than I thought he was at the time, because he already had gray hair back then. So I just wore that man down. I mean, I was in his office every single day, uninvited, and I was determined that when he got those transfer papers from all those people, he would have a face to my name again before the internet, right? It's me. Remember me? I'm the one that's been in your office every single day. And I figured out something. If you really, really want something, right, you have to do everything you can possibly think of to make it happen. And then when you've exhausted everything and you just can't think of anything else you can do, you got to do some more. And that's exactly what I did. And I ended up, one person dropped out and I got selected. And I can promise you I was not the most qualified. I was qualified. I certainly met all the qualifications. But somebody has to make that ultimate decision. And I'm sure there were other people that had better grades than me or, more flight hours than me, but I was selected. Okay, so now I'm at Purdue. Now this is what's interesting. They say they want girls in these programs, right? But then when you actually get there, it's kind of like, do they really want us here or not? So I got there and I realized almost immediately that I was paying a fortune to go to school. I was working 3 jobs and I was on work study in college. And a good percentage of the guys were in ROTC. Not only were they not paying to go to school, but all their books, tuition, room, everything was covered, and they were getting paid a salary for the privilege of attending Purdue. And then at the end of that, they get to go fly fighter jets. And then after they do that for a few years, they get to seamlessly go right to the airlines. Well, what a deal. I want in on that. I want to go fly fighter jets. I want to serve my country. I think that sounds great. So, if you've ever been to a college campus, there is a recruiting office in every single corner of a college campus. And I hit them all. Well, guess what? Women weren't allowed to fly in the military back then. This was in the 80s. It wasn't until 1993, an act of Congress actually changed the laws that allowed women into combat roles, and aircraft were considered weapons, and aircraft, even if you were delivering mail, it was still considered a combat role related to combat. So we could not fly in the military. So I was turned down, wash, rinse, repeat, by every single recruiter. Okay, fine, I don't care. I will do it on my own, which is exactly what I did. So I went through the program, did it all, my own buck, went to a little bit of debt. And again and again, all these discrepancies kept coming up just because I was a girl that I just couldn't quite pinpoint why this kept happening. But so Purdue had a really good out-of-the-box training program. Now, back then, we didn't have flight simulators like we have today. So if you wanted to fly and get an unrestricted rating or license, you had to actually fly the airplane, including commercial aircraft. So we had this program, Purdue had this program with American Airlines, where they would send us down to their flight training center, which was in Texas, and we would actually train with their pilots up in the air in actual Boeing aircraft, which was super, super cool if you're a college kid to get to do that. But this is the thing. I went down there and went through all the flight training, and I bought a Navy business suit because I was training with pilots so that I looked like them. I was a little shorter, right? But I didn't have that cool hat yet, but I wore a Navy business suit, and I think I blended in quite nicely. So at the end of all the training, we got passes to fly there and back like an employee would get a pass. I go to move from the front of the aircraft where I'm flying it to the back to take a passenger seat to fly back to Chicago to go back to Purdue. And guess what? I was not allowed in the cabin of the aircraft. I was not allowed on the aircraft outside of the cockpit door. And do you know why I was not allowed? Because I was wearing pants. And women were not permitted to wear pants at all. And not only were we required to wear a dress, but you had to wear a hose. Your legs could not be shown. And you had to wear heels. You couldn't wear flats because it was considered unfeminine. So I could fly the airplane, but I was not permitted to be any place where I was visible to a passenger because that would be inappropriate. So I had to go find a dress in order to fly home, which I thought was pretty silly. But again and again, these things kept happening. Okay, so moving on, onward and upward here. So I graduate from Purdue. Now I want to go to work for the airlines, right? Who doesn't? Or something where I get paid money. And back then, there were no pathway programs. I wasn't in the military where, everyone just tells you from A, you go to B, and you go to C. I had to figure out on my own, how do I get flight hours? Now, you needed a lot of flight hours for an airline to look at you. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of hours. That's really hard to come by. And anybody who's hiring, anybody who flies smaller planes knows that you need flight hours. So I just started knocking on doors, trying to figure out what job I could get, any job whatsoever, to build flight hours. Well, I lived in New Jersey. I went back to New Jersey. I'm a Jersey girl. And of course, Jersey Shore, right? Grew up at the Jersey Shore. So I got a job for a banner towing company down at the Jersey Shore. Just to show you. So this is the Citabria. This is what we flew. These planes had no doors. We had to hand prop them. If anyone knows, you literally stand in front of the prop and you get it going until it's spinning. And now these planes are on sand. So they're skidding towards you and you're running away as you're trying to get the prop to start. So dangerous. I just look back and I go, that was crazy. Why did we do that stuff? Because we were building hours. All right, so I'm up in the New York area. And I got a job as a sightseeing tour pilot. So I would bring people up and I'd circle the Statue of Liberty, go fly below the Twin Towers, whatever I could interest people in. Back then, pre 9/11, you could do anything. It's like you were an invisible mosquito. As long as you stayed underneath, the big boys, nobody bothered you. So I did all that. What else did I do? I was an aircraft repossessor. So I was that person, if you didn't pay your bills, I would come in. If you saw me walking around your airplane after dark and you didn't pay your bills, airplane might not be there in the morning. And it was great because nobody suspected me. I had the perfect disguise. Yeah, I just walk around, hi, and take their airplane. Nobody looked at me twice. Yeah, it was perfect. So let's see, what else did I do? I was a ferry pilot. I ferried empty planes around the country to deliver them to different people. And let's see what else I have going on here. Okay, my thing just got stuck. Hello. There we go. All right, I was a flight instructor. Quick story. My mom took this picture. The one and only time my mom was in an airplane with me. So I was a flight instructor teaching people how to fly, giving people their license. And I finally convinced my mom to come to the airport to see what I was doing. At this point, the jig was up, right? She comes, very supportive. I appreciate this, Mom. And I'm like trying to get her to get in the airplane. I'll take you for a ride. We'll fly over the house, Mom, right? That'll be fun. She would not get in the airplane. She kept saying, but where's the man? We need a man. And I'm like, Mom, I'm a flight instructor. I don't need a man. Like, it's just you and me. We're good. She made me go find a man. So I literally went to the hangar. I found a man, put him in the airplane, and then she would get in the airplane. She sat in the back so he could sit up front to watch me. Now, keep in mind, this man was not a pilot. He was literally just a man. And then she said it was safe. And then she would get on the airplane, and she did. All right. So from there, I kept building hours. And the way it works as a pilot is you keep building hours, and the planes get progressively bigger and bigger and bigger. Eventually, you get to fly twins. I flew freight, cargo, charters. I did canceled checks. Anybody remember the days we used to write checks? And you would write a check and you'd get it back in the mail and it'd be canceled by the bank. Well, that was an entire industry. We would fly single pilot freight at night. We'd fly all night long when everybody else was sleeping, and we would fly boxes and boxes of canceled checks between banks. It was big business. So that was a great way to build flight time. Okay, now we're getting to the airlines. Finally, at this point, I had enough hours to get hired by an airline. So my very first airline, I got hired by a regional. Who could tell me, who's old enough to tell me what airline this is? Eastern, very good. And the gentleman back there got it also, Eastern Airlines. So Eastern Airlines was my first airline job. Now these planes I was flying, this is a Dornier 228, it was a regional. I was based out of New York, out of JFK, and we basically would feed the major international airports up to the upstate small mountainous airports. We were flying, oh my goodness, we flew 11 legs a day, 6 days a week. We flew all around the clock. We got no rest, no food, couldn't even get off the airplane. We had no bathrooms. We got paid nothing. We figured it out. I think we were making like $1.78 an hour as an airline pilot. We were living below the poverty level. We were all on food stamps because we didn't even make enough money to buy like bologna. It was insane, but we were building hours. All right, so then Frank Lorenzo came in. Eastern went on strike. We got furloughed. We were out in the street. All right, all good things must come to an end. All right, so then I got hired by, well, this is a giveaway. Anybody remember this? Pan Am. I got hired by Pan Am. Again, I was based out of JFK, feeding the small airports, flying IFR, no autopilot, all raw data. We were just using these little round dials with like swinging needles to figure out where we were. Insanely dangerous by today's standards, but we loved it. Boy, we were sharp. We were sharp pilots. Flew for Pan Am, and then, Pan Am went into bankruptcy. I was starting to think it was me. All right, so you know what they say about pilots. Every pilot has a story. There are pilots that have been furloughed, right? Then there are pilots that are going to be furloughed. The airline industry is very, very cyclical. There's ups, there's downs, there's ups. It's kind of like life. For every up, there's a down. You could think, wow, the airlines are really hiring. This is amazing. Give it a year. There's always about every 10 years, the airlines plummet, whether it's COVID or the stock crash in 2008 or 9/11, something is always going to happen. All right. So this is what's so funny. So when I was at Pan Am, right, they had no uniform for me because I was a girl and they couldn't figure it out. So you know what they did? They just gave me all the pieces to the uniform. I actually have this still at home in my drawer. And they said, you're a girl, you can sew, make yourself a uniform. So I did. I made my uniform. So this is actually a recent picture because my uniform recently was accessioned into the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. So thank you. Everyone should make this. So that's the first official female pilot uniform. Actually, my Eastern Airlines uniform was also accessioned. So they're both in there together. My maternity uniform was accessioned to Atlanta Hartsfield. That's a whole nother story. But in any case, moving on. All right, so Pan Am goes into bankruptcy, out in the street again. But then I finally got a real job. Okay, what airline is this? Right, okay, last uniform in the closet. This was it. So my very first aircraft at United Airlines was, what airplane is this? The 747, the whale, the queen of the skies. Right. So I actually have this tail number in my aircraft. That was the airplane that I flew, one of them. Okay, this is tricky. This is for like the advanced level students here. What airport is this? Okay, it can't be LaGuardia because the runways are too short for a wide body. Newark. Okay, who said Newark? Who was that? All right, what runway is this? That is too right. All right, so I was based out of New York, and at United we're always tri-based. You're based out of 3 airports always at one time. So I was based out of Newark, LaGuardia, and out of JFK. Couldn't fly to LaGuardia in that airplane because it was too big, but I was based out of those 3 airports. All right, so I'm flying the 747. Now, let me just tell you something. Okay, this is what it looked like on the inside. So this is what the 747 looked like at the time. This is actually a display at the Smithsonian. I'm starting to get a little bit of a complex about that. Everything about me is a historical relic. But in any case, 747 back then had flight engineers, and that's the position I was hired into. So I was in a very, very senior aircraft. I mean, the pilots that I was flying with, the captain, the first officers, were literally there the last year or two before they retired. the flight engineer was almost always filled by a retired captain because you could continue to fly. We had very strict medicals, and we had to retire at 60, but you could still pass a medical as a flight engineer, as the second in command or third in command. This would be and be the flight engineer, but they had a seat in New York, and I got it. So it was me, and I was flying with my grandpa and my grandpa. And let me just tell you, these pilots, this was a christening by fire because they were old school. This was the era where, they were called sky gods, and they were sky gods. I mean, they navigated in these 747s, they navigated the Earth using celestial navigation. They would put a sextant up through a port in the ceiling of the cockpit, which was still there, the hole's still there, and they would literally navigate and find Tokyo in the middle of the night using a sextant and the stars. So then I come along, and GPS had not been invented yet. Now I look down at all you young kids that go, GPS, please. But we had invented inertial navigation, which was much more accurate than the stars, much less accurate than GPS. So they all kind of looked down on me. But I will say these old guys, bless their hearts, they were so sweet. They really thought that they were going to escape this whole diversity thing that was just starting to happen at the time. This was like the late 80s, early 90s. And then I came along, and I kind of burst that bubble for them. So some of them were really nice, but some of them weren't very nice to me. All right, so that was a bit of a challenge. But, oh, hold on. This was me on the 47. This is actually taken by, well, I won't even go into that, but it's actually, I don't know if you guys know that I'm totally sidetracking here, but Tenerife, which is the world's largest air disaster in the history of the world, 583 people burned to death. The surviving pilot on that for Pan Am ended up becoming a pilot for United. And he was my captain for quite a while because he was based in New York. And he took this picture and gave it to me. It's the only one I have of me of that time. Thank you, Bob. Any case, so the captains were not very cool, right? But you think that was a challenge. Do you know what was even more difficult? The flight attendants. They really, really weren't ready for diversity. They did not like the idea of having a woman up there. They'd come up there and they would serve coffee to all the guys. And then they would say, you can serve your own coffee. We don't need to serve you. So I'd have to go back in the kitchen galley and get my own coffee. Some of them were nice. Some of them were like, oh my goodness gracious, girl power. Like who would have ever thought? A lot of them though, they were even more old school than the pilots. And they just did not like the change. Okay, whatever. Now, do you know what the biggest challenge was, though? It wasn't the pilots. It wasn't flight attendants. Do you know what the biggest challenge was? The passengers. Oh, my goodness gracious. You think that we were trying to kill them. So we would have passengers that would just really get upset. And now, so I'd make a PA, and they would freak out because I'd say I was the pilot speaking. As I went on through my career and eventually became captain and all of that, we would have passengers literally just get up and walk off the airplane when they saw me up there, to save themselves. And I figured something out. So, okay, this is true. It's hard to believe, but there are people, are you ready for this, that are afraid to fly. No, honestly, there are people that are afraid. So they have to see somebody up there that meets their expectations. It has to be a white guy with gray hair and broad shoulders and a deep gravelly voice. And if they don't see that, they're afraid. And so they would react sometimes in really kind of comical ways. But I figured out that you can't tell anybody anything, right? You cannot demand respect. It is not possible. You can only earn it. And the only way that you can earn it is to do a really good job. And then just let people see for themselves that you can fly the airplane. Let them experience it, come to their own conclusions, and that's the only way you can actually change anything. You can't tell anybody how they should think or how they should feel. That will backfire every single time. Okay, so moving on up. The way it works is you go from engineer, eventually to first officer. Some people say co-pilot. That's not a real word. I'm just telling you. You're a first officer and then eventually captain. All right, so now let's get into the heart of what we actually do. So our job, probably 60% of it is flight training. We train and we train and we train. Our entire lives, we go through training. Every time you change seats, you change aircraft. Even if you don't even do that, every 9 months, you have to go to the sweat box, our simulator, and you train and you train and you train. And we train so much, we're not even trained. We're conditioned. We're we're like Pavlov's dogs, like we just know what to do. And what is it that we do in there? Basically, we do everything in the simulator that you cannot do in the airplane. We just practice all the ways that you can die over and over and over again. We just drill and drill and drill. And keep in mind, pilots are the first ones at the scene of the accident. We are fully invested in survival, 100% on board with making sure this plane lands safely. So we practice how to do that. Now, we have in our aircraft a program called FOQA. Every single thing that a pilot does, everything is monitored and recorded. We have area mics, our voice, all of our conversations are recorded. We have rules below 10,000 feet, sterile cockpit, no conversation whatsoever. Can't even say like, how's your mom feeling? Nothing. Below 10,000 feet, it's all recorded. You will be caught. You will get in trouble. All of the parameters when we're flying is in real time, recorded and sent to the company and to the government. And so say you're coming into Chicago and say you make a perfectly beautiful, safe landing, but say somewhere in that approach, you were like high and fast, you will get a phone call. Captain Savino, you were 10 knots above VREF, at a mile out. What was going on there? So you have to comply with everything because Big Brother is recording every single thing that we do. Keeps us honest. All right, so let me just give you an example of a simulator ride. So I remember, again, we train and do everything that have killed pilots in the past. We get the do-over that we wish they could have had. And we practice all the things that they've caught pilots doing that maybe they got away with and they landed safely, but there's a pattern here. So let's make sure that you don't come in high and fast into Chicago because X, Y, and Z has done this. So I remember in one training session, we're coming into land, I'm flying the airplane, and everything's great, hunky-dory, perfect. Got through a whole bunch of emergencies. I'm like, yes, there's the runway. Did it, pulled this off. Because, every time you go to the sim, you're playing, you bet your job. So you better make sure you get it right. We're coming in, and we hit wind shear. Bad. So we're getting pushed down into the ground, and I'm a robot, I go through everything. It's not working. Keep going, everything. It's not working. Ground's coming up fast, and we're just going down, 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 and we crash. And I just killed myself. And I took 200 people with me. It is a bad, bad feeling. Even though it's fake, when you are fighting for your life, and these simulators are very, very real. It's the actual cockpit. This is a simulator. When you crash and you die in the simulator, that leaves an impression. You don't want to ever do that again. It's a sick feeling. Well, that instructor ended up telling me afterwards, so, Laura, he goes, I just want you to know. He goes, I put in, when you crash back there? Yeah. He goes, I put in unrecoverable wind shear. No matter what you did, there was nothing you could have done. The plane was going to crash. But okay, thanks. So they do stuff like that too, just to make sure that you understand how serious all this is and so that you can experience worst case scenarios so that you are hell-bent and determined to make sure that doesn't happen again. All right, so going on, being a pilot. Oh, okay, I'm going to tell you a funny story from this picture. So when I moved from the right to the left seat to the captain seat, I had been flying at United for many years at this point. I had stellar training records, have never had a problem. And when you go through upgrade school, through training, you go through ground school, and then you go through all the simulator training, and then you do training in the air. And so your training records are pretty out there. Everybody knows if you can fly or not, right? So I went through all of this, and then at the end, you end up flying for about a week with an examiner in the air with passengers on revenue flights. But before they let you go, you are being monitored by a check airman. So all that went great, and I got signed off, and I was on my way, right? Independent captain. Well, the check airman ended up running into me a short time after, and he says, Laura, he goes, I have to tell you something. He said, after I finished my IOE with you, he said, I got called into the chief pilot's office. That's like getting called to the principal's office. Nobody wants to get called into the chief pilot's office. And I'm like, for what? He goes, because he wanted to talk about you. I'm like, for what? He's like, well, he said he had some questions for me. I'm like, what? He said, well, he had no questions about your flying. He goes, he knows you can fly. Everyone knows you can fly. He goes, but he wanted to know. He said, does she have command authority? That's a big buzzword. Command authority means, can you be in command? Can you be in charge? Can you be the leader? Will people listen to you? That was his big question for the examiner. And this examiner said, he goes, in my entire life, I've been doing this for over 20 years. Nobody's ever asked me that about a pilot. I was the first female. So it's interesting how they couldn't question my abilities to fly the airplane, but they could still find things that must be wrong, right? Surely she can't actually be in charge. All right, so moving on. A big part of being a pilot is it's a lifestyle. I don't know if you can tell I'm very pregnant in this picture. So this particular month, I think I was 7.5 months pregnant. You got to go to work no matter what. See, men's lives, sorry, men, it doesn't really change a whole lot. Women's lives, they go through different cycles, different phases. At this point, I was 7.5 months pregnant. I had a baby at home. And I think this month I flew 6 round trips to Paris. Paris is nice the first 27 times. After that, you're like, I just want to go to bed. So I'm sucking on saltines. I have a barf bag. I'm pregnant. And, I'm just going round trip back and forth to Paris. I was tired. But my point is that being a pilot is being a pilot, right? You're flying. But a big part of it is it's a lifestyle choice, not just for you, but for your entire family. Everybody has got to be on board with you being gone half the time. All right. I had a lot of women, young girls say, I don't want to be a pilot because I'm afraid that it's going to compromise, me being a mother, my motherhood years. And yeah, of course it's a compromise. Absolutely, it's going to be a compromise. But you know what? Every choice you make is a compromise, right? Ever hear the cliche, the old expression, I've never known anybody on their deathbed to say, oh, I wish I had spent more time at work, or I wish I'd spent more time in the office. That is not true. I know many, many, many women that have, for very noble reasons, given up all their dreams, all their passions, everything they wanted to do as a child to stay home and be a mom full time, which is wonderful. It's a choice, right? We have a choice. So kudos to those women that do that. But at the end of it all, I'm telling you, 9 out of 10 of them have a lot of what ifs, a lot of, I could have done this, I could have done that. And they're looking back saying, I wish I had pursued my dreams a little bit more. So the bottom line is, it is a compromise. You have to find the balance. Whatever you choose, you have to figure out a way just to come to peace with those choices. It doesn't have to be one extreme, and it doesn't have to be the other extreme. All right, they're giving me my 5 minutes here, so I'm going to click through this. Being a pilot is very low statistically. About 4.5% of pilots in the U.S. are female. But it's not just pilots, right? We also have very few women in any aviation-related fields. Other than flight attendants, God knows we have women flocking from the streets to become flight attendants. Other than that, we cannot get women into any of these aviation fields. Maintenance, engineering, our dispatchers, our air traffic controllers, these are all phenomenal jobs. Ladies, 51% of the talent in this country is female. What the heck? Why are we not going for these really good, high-paying jobs that women are completely capable of? Most of these fields just take common sense, logic, organizational skills, and yet women just opt out of them. Okay, this is a quiz. This is our last quiz of the night, ladies and gentlemen. What country in the world has the most female pilots? Who hires more women pilots than any other country? India. India is number 1, followed by Ireland and then South Africa. The United States, we're not even in the top 5. Not even in the top 5. All right, so I am now working hard to try to change this. This is the Smithsonian. I'm teaching classes. I'm trying to get girls on board. Joe, it's interesting. I was talking to these girls, and we're trying to just to see it to be it. Let people know, let people that otherwise aren't in the heritage of aviation. Aviation is very much a heritage occupation. Most people don't become pilots unless they saw it growing up. They had a father or somebody who was a pilot or in the military. And it's hard to convince people, is this something they can do? I think there's a big misconception when it comes to STEM, right? Science, tech, engineering, and math. People think it's something that boys are good at or that they can't do. I had this one girl say to me, I really like sewing. I can never do math and science. I'm like, wait a second, sewing. So what you're telling me is you go to Joann Fabrics, you pick a piece of fabric from a bolt, you take that fabric, you cut it, you design it, you measure it, you put it together, you assemble it on a machine, and then you wear it. I said, you're an engineer, girl. I said, if a boy did the exact same thing with a piece of metal, you'd be like, oh my God, look at him. He's a natural engineer. I said, that's exactly how you think. I said, you are thinking like an engineer. But for some reason, if you're doing something that's perceived as, well, that's a girl thing to do, then people just poo-poo it like it must be easy and it must not really involve a lot of thinking. We have to change not telling girls what their interests should be. We should encourage them to like doing the things that they naturally like doing, right? And then show them how good they are and how that lends itself to all sorts of other things. All right, so I wrote a book, Jet Boss. This is also the Smithsonian. So my book is now there with my uniforms. And that's it. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up. I will say writing a book causes, especially a memoir, causes a little bit of self-reflection and kind of forces you to really think about like where you came from and how you got to where you are. And I figured out just a couple of things about how I think and how I got to where I am. One is, as I look back, I did a happy dance in my head for every single little thing that I accomplished, every new skill. Now, I know right now another big cliche is celebrate your failures, and every time you fail, you've learned something. Now, if you're a pilot, you really don't get a chance to celebrate your failures. You don't actually want to fail, but unless you're in the simulator, and then you don't like it. But what I think people are missing is every single day you achieve something. Every day you get up and you have some purpose, like you learned a new skill, you did something, you studied for a test and you did well on the test. That's an achievement. Every single time you soak in that accomplishment and you really like give yourself credit for it, it builds your self-confidence. And then you're ready for the bigger skill and then the bigger skill, and you just keep moving forward. And that's the way it worked for me. All right. I also realized that I looked at life through rose-colored glasses. There were a lot of really crappy things that happened to me, and I never, like, if somebody was mean to me, I never once took it personally. I never said, "Oh, poor me." You know, my only thought was, "Well, that guy, he's not very nice. Boy, he's got a problem." It didn't occur to me that it was my problem. I just didn't see it like that. You know, like our flight training center, there were no bathrooms for women, none, and I had to go across the street to where we had secretaries to like use a bathroom. And it didn't occur to me to be mad about that. I just thought, wow, when the architects designed this building, they had no idea I was going to be here, did they? I thought that was a point of pride. It didn't get me mad at all. So I just, you know, in hindsight, like everything, I spun everything somehow in my favor. And, you know, that just, that kept me going. I figured out, you know, like they say, when one door closes, there is always a window that you can climb through. That's it. Thank you.